September 26, 1983. It is 12:40 a.m., somewhere deep inside a secret Soviet bunker, buried beneath the forests outside Moscow. A single alarm goes off, then another, then another. Within seconds, 5 nuclear missiles appear on the screen. American missiles, heading straight for the Soviet Union. The protocol is simple. If America launches, Soviet Union launches back, immediately. No questions asked. The man sitting at that screen has one job: report the attack to his superiors. If he picks up that phone, World War III begins in minutes. 300 million people die before sunrise. He stares at the screen. His hands are shaking. And then he makes a decision that no military training ever prepared him for. He does nothing. His name was Stanislav Petrov, and you have never heard of him because the Soviet Union made sure of that. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand the world Stanislav Petrov was living in. 1983 was not just another year of the Cold War. It was the most dangerous year since the Cuban Missile Crisis. America and Soviet Union were not just enemies. They were 2 loaded guns pointed at each other's heads, fingers on the trigger. Ronald Reagan had just called the Soviet Union an evil empire on live television. America had deployed new nuclear missiles in Western Europe, closer to Soviet soil than ever before. And just 3 weeks before that September night, Soviet air defense had shot down a Korean passenger plane, killing 269 civilians, including a U.S. congressman. The world was watching. The tension was unbearable. Both sides genuinely believed the other side might strike first. In this atmosphere, the Soviet military created a new early warning system, a satellite network called OKO, designed to detect any American nuclear launch instantly. Stanislav Petrov was the duty officer responsible for monitoring that system. He was 44 years old, experienced, calm, respected, but nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for what was about to happen. It started with a single beep. 1 missile detected. Protocol said, report immediately to High Command. But Petrov hesitated. Something felt wrong. If America was going to start World War III, why would they fire just 1 missile? A real nuclear attack would be hundreds of missiles simultaneously. Not 1, not 5. But the system was showing 5 now, and the confidence level on screen read 1 word: launch. The sirens were screaming. His 200 staff members were staring at him, waiting for orders. Superiors were calling on the phone. Every second he waited was a second Soviet Union was not responding. Every second he waited, he was going against direct military protocol. Every second he waited, he was committing what could be considered treason. He had no way to verify the information. Ground radar had not confirmed anything. But ground radar takes time, and time was the one thing he did not have. His gut told him it was a false alarm. But what if his gut was wrong? What if those missiles were real? What if in the next 20 minutes, 5 nuclear warheads hit Soviet cities, and he had done nothing? He would be responsible for the deaths of millions of his own people. He picked up the phone. And reported it as a false alarm. In that one moment, Stanislav Petrov made a decision that no protocol, no training, no military manual had ever authorized him to make. He trusted his instinct over the machine. He trusted logic over fear, and he stayed silent when the entire system around him was screaming at him to launch. But here's what you need to understand. He did not know he was right. For the next 23 minutes, the longest 23 minutes in human history, Stanislav Petrov sat at that desk, completely alone with his decision, with absolutely no confirmation that he had done the right thing. 23 minutes. That is how long it takes for a nuclear missile to travel from America to Soviet Union. Every minute that passed, he was either a hero or a traitor. There was no in between. He later said, "I felt like I was sitting on a hot frying pan." At minute 23, no explosion. No impact, no missiles. It was a false alarm. The Soviet satellite system had malfunctioned. It had mistaken the reflection of sunlight off clouds for American missile launches, a flaw in the software, a glitch in the system. That is all that stood between us and nuclear war. A glitch, and one man who refused to panic. But here's where the story gets darker. You would think Stanislav Petrov would be celebrated, called a hero, given a medal. Instead, the Soviet military did something completely different. Something that tells you everything about how the Cold War actually worked. They buried the story. Petrov was never punished, but he was never rewarded either. He was quietly reassigned, forced into early retirement. Because if the Soviet military admitted Petrov had saved the world, they would also have to admit their brand new billion-dollar satellite system had nearly started World War III by accident. And that was a truth the Soviet Union could never allow. Stanislav Petrov went home, back to his ordinary life, his small apartment, his garden, and the world he had saved never knew his name. For 10 years, this story remained completely classified. But what happened when it finally came out? What did the Soviet government do to the man who saved humanity? And more importantly, was this the only time the world almost ended by accident during the Cold War? Because I promise you, it was not. Find out in Part 2, September 26, 1983. One man, one decision. The world survived, but here is the question nobody asks. What happened after? What did the Soviet government do to the man who saved 300 million lives? And more importantly, was this the only time a single human being stood between us and nuclear war? Because I promise you, it was not even close. When the story of that night finally leaked years later, the world expected one thing: a hero's welcome, a medal, a statue, something. Instead, Stanislav Petrov gave interviews from a tiny, crumbling apartment outside Moscow, alone, barely able to afford food. His wife had died. His health was failing. A German documentary filmmaker found him in 2004, 21 years after that night, and was shocked. This man had saved human civilization, and he was living like he didn't exist. When the filmmaker asked Petrov how he felt about never being rewarded, Petrov shrugged. He said, "I was just doing my job." But that was not entirely true, because doing his job following protocol would have meant making the call, reporting the launch, starting the war. What Petrov actually did that night was something far more dangerous than following orders. He thought for himself. And in the Soviet military, thinking for yourself was not a virtue. It was a threat. That is why they buried him. Not because he failed, because he succeeded in a way the system could never officially admit. He was given a small award quietly years later. No ceremony, no announcement, no public acknowledgement. Stanislav Petrov died in May 2017. He was 77 years old. His neighbor found him, alone in his apartment, He had been dead for several days before anyone noticed. The man who saved the world died like he never existed. Now, here is where the story gets truly terrifying. The Soviet early warning system, OKO, the one that showed 5 missiles that were never there, it malfunctioned again, multiple times after that night. The software flaw was known, documented, and the system stayed operational for years anyway, because admitting the flaw meant admitting the near disaster, and admitting the near disaster meant admitting that Soviet technology, supposedly equal to America's, had almost destroyed the Soviet Union itself. So they kept it running, a broken system, with the power to end the world. And here is the part that should keep you up at night. America had the exact same problem. In November 1979, 4 years before Petrov's night, a U.S. military computer began showing a full-scale Soviet nuclear attack. Hundreds of missiles incoming. Real. American nuclear bombers started their engines. Missile crews went to combat-ready positions. The National Security Advisor was woken up at 3 a.m. The reason it stopped? Someone checked a backup radar, manually, found nothing. The cause of the alert? A training simulation tape had been accidentally loaded into the live warning system. A training tape. That is all. That is how close it was. The investigation afterwards found there had been zero protocol in place to distinguish a real attack from a simulation running on the wrong machine. They fixed it, eventually, but that night it was one person checking one backup radar that stopped a potential American launch. But if Petrov is the man who saved the world in 1983, then Vasili Arkhipov is the man who saved it 20 years earlier, and almost no one knows his name either. October 1962, Cuban Missile Crisis. The most famous nuclear standoff in history. What the history books tell you. Kennedy and Khrushchev. Diplomacy, tension, resolution. What the history books do not tell you. On October 27, 1962, a Soviet submarine carrying a nuclear torpedo was sitting at the bottom of the ocean near Cuba. American destroyers had located it. They had been dropping practice depth charges, non-lethal, to force it to surface. Standard procedure. But inside that submarine, B-59, the crew had been underwater for days. They had lost radio contact with Moscow. They did not know if war had already begun. The temperature inside had risen to 60 degrees Celsius. Men were passing out from heat and carbon dioxide. The captain was convinced World War III had started. He ordered the nuclear torpedo armed and ready to fire. Under Soviet protocol, a nuclear torpedo required authorization from THREE officers. The captain, the political officer, and the second in command. 2 of the 3 said yes. The second in command, Vasili Arkhipov, said no. He argued, he pushed back. He stood in a boiling submarine, surrounded by men who believed the war had begun, and he refused. He convinced the captain to surface instead. They surfaced, made contact, learned the war had not started. The torpedo was never fired. Thomas Blanton, director of the National Security Archive, later said that Vasili Arkhipov saved the world that day. Arkhipov died in 1998, quietly, without recognition. The Soviet and Russian government kept the incident classified for decades. He never knew that historians would one day call him the most important person of the 20th century. Do Do you see the pattern yet? Every single time the world came closest to ending, it was not stopped by a president, not by a treaty, not by a hotline or a summit or a diplomatic breakthrough. It was stopped by one ordinary person who chose to pause, to think, to go against the machine. Petrov, Arkhipov, the unnamed radar operator in 1979. The entire architecture of nuclear deterrence, MAD they called it, mutually assured destruction, was built on the assumption that the system would work perfectly, that computers would not malfunction, that submarines would have communication, that no one would panic. Every single one of those assumptions was wrong, and the only thing standing between us and the end of civilization every single time was a human being who decided to trust their instincts over the protocol. Think about that. We built the most destructive weapons in human history. We pointed them at each other. We created elaborate systems to manage them. And then we crossed our fingers and hoped that somewhere in the chain, a Petrov, an Arkhipov would exist at exactly the right moment. We got lucky, over and over again. The question is, how long does luck last? Stanislav Petrov once said something that nobody quotes enough. He said, "I am not a hero. I was just the right person in the right place at the right time." Another man might have made a different decision. That is not a comforting thought. That is the most terrifying sentence ever spoken about the Cold War, because it means the world did not survive because the system was good. The world survived because we got lucky with the humans inside it. And somewhere in archives still classified today, there are incidents we have never heard of. Moments just like these, where someone we will never know made a decision we will never learn about and quietly saved all of us. They never got a medal. They never got a statue. Most of them died alone, and the world they saved never even knew their names.